couldn't recommend this enough. Today, as I was getting ready to film, I kind of caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I was like, wow, that looks really nice. I think I need one in a neutral. That part of it became so potato chippy, popcorny, nitty. I think I need to make one for my mom. Excellent. I think I want to make one for my boyfriend's mom. I'm like literally inserting the needle to my sweater to hold it for me. I think everyone needs one.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. I am really excited to chat about my finished objects, a couple of WIPs. We're going to look a little bit further at a mid-project blocked WIP and also talk about the next cast on that I've done a gauge swatch for. I have some acquisitions, so we have a lot going on today. Before I get into all of that, I do just want to make sure that we don't forget to announce the winner of the Give a Yay from last week's podcast. So if this is your name on the screen here, then please make sure that you email me at akanoraknits@gmail.com so that I can get you your free pattern, and stay tuned for the next way that you could be given a yay this holiday season. With that out of the way, I do think that we should just go ahead and dive on in. So if you've been here for the past couple of weeks, then you've already been able to tell that what I'm wearing today is indeed my finished yoga winter sweater by Nora WIP. This was a little bit of an impulse cast on this season, something that just filled a void in my knitting, not only my wardrobe, but also just what was on the needles. I was looking for something that I could knit mindlessly, and this looked like it filled that box. So this is a top-down raglan style sweater, and its main features in the design are not only the 2x2 ribbed turtleneck that you see with those 2x2 ribbed cuffs, but mostly the way that this hem tapers in and creates a split hem that features these like really pretty V openings on the sides that start right around the natural waist, the top of a pair of high-waisted jeans, and then just come down to this really beautiful point. And something that now having this on, I feel like is such a gorgeous, flattering fit where you don't have to tuck the garment in to create more of a waist, more of a shape. I 100% would love to knit more sweaters that have this style. I just think that there's something about the way that it cuts in and then allows the hips to kind of come out a little bit, but it's still oversized and floating away from the body. I just feel like this is such a gorgeous go-to fit for me. Now, I knit mine in the size extra large, and I did not do a gauge swatch, so I will definitely make sure to put on the screen here what was my gauge versus what the pattern called for gauge was. I did still knit mine on the recommended needles, which is a 5mm needle, and I used Barocco Ultra Wool in the color Bear. So that's a superwash wool, and the color of this is it's a perfectly dark chocolate brown. But if you see it in sunlight, I haven't been able to capture this quite right on video yet. It really truly has a purpley, plummy undertone to it that's actually way more prominent than you would expect it to be. But at first glance, in just neutral kind of natural lighting, it is very much just a dark chocolate brown, nearly black. Now, that being said too, one of the challenges that I did face with this sweater is that the yarn I was using, I had purchased in 2 separate dye lots, and I had every intention of trying my best to blend those two by utilizing some helical knitting, which essentially just means that you're kind of alternating back and forth and striping with 2 different skeins at the same time. So the idea being that you can at least kind of blend and draw out the different dye lots, you know, instead of just having a color blocking. It's not a perfect solution, but it's definitely one that I would recommend if you were in the same situation. Now, I just circumstantially totally forgot to ever work in that second dye lot. And so I do have two places on my sweater where there is a color blocked contrast. However, when you see it on the video, I try to boost the exposure of this sweater when it's not on me so that you can really see the details of the sweater. That's just so that you could see what the knitting did. However, in person, in regular natural lighting, when you don't know, when I haven't called attention to it, I actually tested this theory on my sister the other day. I wore this sweater out with her and I said, my sweater is two different colors. Can you tell where? And she was looking at me like I had five heads. She was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I could not begin to tell you. So for me, I think that means this is a win. I will not be ripping it out and starting over. I will say that when I looked at it in editing last week, just seeing it with that exposure boosted, I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually really terrible. And because I know exactly where it is, I know where the line of demarcation is, but it's really when it's in motion, in person, in normal lighting, it is not at all obvious. And in fact, the part that's more obvious than the other is actually the line that I have on the front of the sweater, which is about an inch and a half right before the ribbing starts. And then the other spot is right here on the sleeves where the stitches were put on hold after finishing the raglan increases. That's the other place where that color shift happens. And that one, I actually almost can't even see. It's hard for me to pinpoint exactly where it is. So I don't know what that's about, but just so you know, I know there are a lot of people who are concerned about the color, and it is just one of those things that when I boost the exposure, it's going to be way more obvious to you. And also, I told you where it was. So that is a challenge that I did face with the sweater. And I will say that moving forward, I won't let myself do that again, just because I would rather at least make the attempt to blend those things rather than having that blatant line, especially in something that's important to me like a sweater. But in this project in particular, it's really not the end of the world. Now, I said that this is a top-down raglan style sweater. You do begin with your cast-on edge, and that is the edge that remains raw at the top of the turtleneck. Having completed mine now, I am feeling like my cast on, I knew from the get-go, was pretty sloppy. I did the cast on that was called for in the pattern, and it just came out extremely loose for me, which was a good thing because the idea is that this remains really stretchy, and it has. I can get this over my head with a full face of makeup and full hair done and really not disturb those things too much. So that's great. But for two reasons, I do think that I am going to rip out my cast on edge. I've never done that before, but I do want to do that. And I would like this, I think, a lot more if my turtleneck was just a half an inch shorter. Like I said, I wore it out the other day and I actually wound up folding the collar in on itself because I was finding the turtleneck to be a little bit too neck bracey for me. And I just think it's a little bit too high. Now, having it folded down, I do feel like it doesn't give that chic turtleneck look that I want. So I did consider maybe just folding it and having more of like a funnel neck look, but I really love the idea of this being a true turtleneck. I just think, and it's hard for me to kind of create the look, I can only fold down so much fabric and it kind of wants to flip up, but I really do think that if it just hit that half inch lower, it would be a lot more, I don't even know what the word is. I feel like the way that it is right now, it looks like my head is just sitting on top of a sweater and you lose my entire neck. So I just want to see the littlest bit of a neck. I also think it would kind of open up just that little bit of space for my earrings and everything to come through, but it is so marginal. And so between the kind of sloppy cast on and my desire for it to be that little bit shorter, I do think I will go in and remove just the first few rows that I had knit. Again, I've never done that before, so I'll report back on how that experience goes. I don't know if I'm going to get to it right away, but it is top of mind for this project. So once you finish knitting that long span of 2x2 rib, you jump into some German short rows on the back. And I do also think this is one of those things that by the time they wraps around to the front here, I'm not sure how obvious it is right now, but I feel like my little German short row stitch is a little gapey, a little sloppy. It's not the end of the world, but it's just something that I should keep in mind for the next time I'm knitting German short rows, because they do kind of wrap around to the front. And then the other thing that happens with this pattern is that the point where you start knitting the 2x2 rib, it winds up becoming your front of sweater. So the beginning of round is actually right about here. And I just found that to be the weirdest thing. Why was the pattern written that way? I'm not sure, because following the directions to a T, you wind up with those German short rows on the back, as they should be, to lift the back of the neck, but then your beginning of round becomes the front of the sweater. So I wound up having a tail on the front that I had to weave in. That's something that I think when I go to remove the cast on in those first few rows, I'm probably going to try my best to figure out how to get that beginning of round to the back so I could weave in my tail a little bit more neatly. As it is too, I did wind up leaving a little bit more of, I didn't really weave in the end too much, so that it would be easier for me to kind of unpick that after I did just wear it for the initial, day it was done. So after the German short rows, you work your way through the raglan increases. Things get pretty standard raglan from there. Put those sleeves on hold while you work down the body. I followed the pattern as to how many rows I should do before you wind up splitting for the front and the back. And then the front and the back are worked separately, and while you're decreasing down the sides until you eventually do the 2x2 rib on the bottom. Now, something that's interesting is that the 2x2 rib on the collar was all done on a 4mm needle, but the entire rest of the sweater is done on 5mm needles. And I think that that's just because you're already doing these decreases. You don't want it to then be like cinching in on the 2x2 rib at the bottom. You just want the continuity in that design element. And then it was just something else that happened in the sleeves. Now, I'm really happy with where the top of those V's are. So this point where this split, I really like where that's sitting on me. I don't mind that when I move, you do get a little peek of skin. I think because everything else is so covered, it keeps it light and modern and youthful and a little fresh. So I'm okay with that. But if you wanted this sweater without being able to see so much flesh underneath, if you wanted to just drop that body down a little bit more, you could realistically just keep knitting, and then keep in mind that you'll want to do fewer decreases, so your bottom part isn't going to wind up being quite as narrow as it is in the pattern. But I definitely think that it's something you could do to alter this for your own needs. You would just wind up with a little bit of a wider kind of front and back panel, which I still think would give that really beautiful look of the hips kind of coming out the sides of the sweater. Now, I don't know what my problem is with sleeves lately, but even me trying to knit these sleeves longer than I wanted them, they've still wound up being just the littlest bit too short. I can totally grab them and kind of pull them down my arms, but when I'm not doing that, they do hit at like that perfect, just, bottom of the thumb, base of the thumb bone point. It's fine. It's just kind of funny to me because I was like, I'm going to knit these sleeves so long, and that didn't happen. Something that I thought was funny though is that I swore I was following the pattern verbatim this whole time, and I'm not sure what I did when I completely made up a number for how often I was supposed to do decreases in the sleeves. However, I think it was a good mistake because I actually was supposed to have decreased at a more frequent rate than I did, which would have meant that my cuffs would be more narrow than they were. I do have more stitches on my cuffs than is stated for my size in the pattern, and that's just because of the amount of decreases that I did and how long I wound up knitting them. It is what it is, and that was where it was so important. When I was doing my second sleeve, I followed my system of just moving these stitch markers over from one sleeve to the next and using the same little row counter to count my rows from one sleeve to the next. That preventative measure of having consistency across both sleeves versus one following the pattern and one not, it worked out to my benefit. So I will say that if you are liking the kind of width of my sleeves, I would do the decreases less frequently than stated in the pattern. And again, that all is going to depend on whether or not my gauge was correct and all of that too. But that is something that I'm really glad that I did because I love the width of these sleeves. I think this is the perfect kind of relaxed fit for a sleeve. I liked that I blocked the cuffs out a little bit, and so they're kind of wide but not too wide. The only thing is that, yeah, I don't know what the heck I'm doing with my sleeve lengths, that these did wind up being just a little bit short. With those couple of things, yeah, the sleeves are a little bit shorter than I wanted them. The neck is a little bit longer than I wanted them. I very well could and may add a little bit of length to the sleeves, but I don't think that it's the end of the world. I'm just wondering if maybe I am going to take the time to go back and adjust the neck a little. Maybe it would be worth it to just go ahead and do the sleeves too, especially considering the fact that the cuffs really don't take a lot of time to knit at all. But even with all that being said, by far, this is one of my favorite things I've made. I think I do say that about everything, but just wearing it around today as I was getting ready to film, I kind of caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I was like, wow, that looks really nice. I just love the color. I love the fit. I love the style. I love the simplicity. I think that this is literally the perfect basic for my wardrobe personally, because it does still have a little personality to it by having those little cutouts on the sides. And yet it's something that's so effortless looking. I could literally run out the house right now in my jeans. I could really casual this up and throw on like a puffer vest with it and just use my little UGG slippers and throw my hair in a bun or a baseball hat and just be very like chic and kind of cool and casual. But I also think that this would look absolutely divine if it was paired with a satin midi. I don't do mini too much anymore, but like a midi or a maxi skirt. I also think to that point that maybe even throwing it on over top of a dress, because it does have those V cutouts on the side, it would sort of act similarly to a crop top sweater, but without having to be cropped all over. It just kind of brings the emphasis back to that waist, which is where typically I like to draw a little attention to emphasize that smallest part of my own body. But yeah, I think it would look really, really great. Very chic, very festive and like very sophisticated if it was paired with a maxi satin skirt and a pair of pumps. I just think it's such a wardrobe staple, and I think it would be really fun in any color. I'm just a big, big fan. One of the really cool things too about the fact that it decreases down the way that it does is, by the time you're halfway through a body on a sweater, it typically does start to feel a little bit like a slog, right? You're thinking, oh gosh, we still have so much to go. But once you split for the front and the back, you are dropping your stitches every other row. And so it winds up flying by, and that part of it became so potato chippy, popcorny, knitty. It was so nice and such a relief to feel like, oh my gosh, the stitches, we're just flying now. By the time you got to that last row, you may as well have been knitting around on a sleeve. It was just so much easier. And you're like, wow, this is moving me towards the end of the sweater, the end of the body. So even if you're looking for a quick knit, the amount of time that this spent on my needles does not reflect the amount of time that it should have spent on the needles. I think it would be a fairly quick knit for all those reasons. Overall, the pattern writing style, not my 100% favorite, but I made it in the end. There's nothing necessarily wrong with the way that the pattern is written. It's just one of those things where there's kind of a lot of information, and yet it's like, what did it say? It could maybe use with a little bit of editing to kind of just pare back on the words of the pattern, but that's, by person to person, we're all going to have our different kind of preferences in that department. So with all that being said, let me run you down the stats really quick for this sweater, because I think you're also going to be surprised by how much I actually spent on this whole project. All right, reading this off the iPad as I do, we are talking about the Yoga Winter Sweater, again by Nora Rook. I purchased this pattern. I actually had to purchase it from her website. Ravelry directs you to her website. and it looks like it cost about $5.25. I did purchase this pattern myself with my own money, and it was not already in my library. I purchased it specifically to knit this project when I did. The yarn that I used is Barocco Ultra Wool. That's 100% superwash wool. It's the colorway Bear, and it was hanging out in my stash waiting to be knit into something. Now, this is where things get really cool because this yarn per skein at full price is about $12 a skein. At least that's how much it would have cost at the yarn shop that I bought it at. However, the yarn shop was going out of business, and so everything that I purchased that day was 75% off. Therefore, I wound up spending only $3 per ball on this yarn, and I only wound up using 5 balls of the yarn. So that means that had I bought the yarn at full price, the total for the yarn would have been about $60. However, my yarn total came to $15, being that there were no additional expenses like buttons or anything like that. My total spent, if everything were full price, would have been about $65.25. But because I was able to get the yarn at such a great sale price, I only paid $20.25 for this sweater. And that was all for a project that was on my needles for 43 days. Now, I by far, if I saw this in a store, would pay that price for this sweater. I think it's a really, really great value for what I've got in the end. And the only thing that I'm going to say more about this is on the yarn. This is that Barocco Ultra Wool that I have used once before. I used the chunky version. This is now my second time using it. And then I have another sweaters quantity in the DK version that I'm planning to knit up hopefully this winter. So I had issues knitting with the chunky version. I did not like the feeling of it while I was knitting, but the blocked sweater I was fine with in the end. This I also had issues with while knitting, just that I found that the superwash really made it feel quite plasticky and quite sticky and squeaky and scratchy and weird to work with. It did not enhance my knitting experience, it being superwash versus natural. Now, I thought that that would all block out, but I would say that of all of my sweaters, this is maybe one of the itchiest to me. I am wearing it on bare skin right now, and I will, but I'm also not particularly sensitive, and I just feel it sitting on my skin in a kind of unpleasant way. For those reasons, when I wind up knitting with the DK version of the yarn, I do think I'm going to try and pair it with a mohair and see if that helps, because even at the $12 a ball, it is a little bit more affordable than other yarns of the same type. And I just want to find out the best way to work with it to have the happiest end result. But I will say that in this standard Barocco Ultra Wool, I feel like the finished fabric is still a little bit unpleasant feeling. And if you are sensitive to wool, I wouldn't recommend this. And I think for reference, I would say that I have a harder time wearing this on bare skin than I do wearing Lion Brand Fisherman's Wool next to skin. So if that means something for you, if that puts it into context for you, then I hope that that just helps when you're looking at this yarn in the future. And like I said, I am going to try pairing the next sweater's quantity with a mohair and see if maybe that's just the trick to kind of soften it up that little bit. But otherwise, I don't even care. All the little flaws, I'm obsessed with this sweater. I absolutely love it. 10 out of 10, recommend it for the fit and everything. I just think it's great. So that is my yoga winter sweater. We are going to now move on. And let us start with the project that's been on my needles the longest, and that is my Grayling sweater by Magdalena Parker Knitonomy. It is an all-over cabled sweater, but I'm knitting mine into a maxi dress for the holiday season, and I'm knitting mine out of Knit Picks Wonder Fluff in the colorway Espresso Heather. I mentioned last week that someone commented saying that when they knit with this yarn, they found that it grew so much that they had to throw it in the dryer after blocking. And my little alarm bells were going off where I said, I do not want to go a stitch further without finding out if I've knit this in the right size. So I did wind up blocking it. It was kind of late night block, so I didn't get any footage beforehand, but I do have footage from a couple of weeks ago when I tried this on, and I didn't make a ton of progress in between. So I think we'll be able to see for sure how it's fitting today. And my goal is to compare it to a store-bought knit dress that I have that I'm kind of aiming for the fit to be similar to. So I might even just throw that, I brought the dress down, so I might just throw that on and kind of pop the sweater on top of it just to kind of see, but I'm also going to take some measurements. Now I'm knitting mine in the size 4. I did do a gauge swatch. This is being knit up on 5.5 millimeter needles. And my goal is that it should fit about the same as the dress does. I'd be okay with it being a little bit bigger, but not too much bigger. So anyway, let me get the dress on and the sweater on and we can see where things are at. Here is the dress that I have on right now. And here is the Grayling sweater, what I've done so far. Let's see. All right, I definitely have to stand up for this one. Okay, I'm back in my outfit and everything, and I'm really glad that I took the time to do this. So I blocked this. I did my best not to overstretch it, so I just kind of let it live as naturally as possible. And then trying it on just now, I could tell that it was a little bit bigger than the dress that I'm aiming for. So I went ahead and just laid them both flat and measured the flat lay width of the body. Now, the dress fit that I'm aiming for comes in that flat lay around 24.5 inches, whereas this sweater is coming in around 26.5 inches. So definitely there's going to be about a 2-inch difference between the two. Now, what I also did was I measured the width of one of the cables plus its kind of coordinating purl gap in between, just to kind of figure out, you know, if I felt like it was too big, could I go in and remove a couple of cables? And that is about 3 inches for a cable plus a little purl space. It's about 3 inches. So already, if I were to remove a single cable, this dress would wind up being smaller than I am hoping it would be. The thing is, too, in order to size this down, I would have to remove to keep it symmetrical. My thought was that if it was extremely too big, I could go back to where I split for the underarms and simply remove the cable that I've created on each of these sides. But that would mean, let me math this so that I don't say the wrong thing. As it is right now, I am aiming for about a 49-inch body circumference. And with the way that things are shaking out at the moment, it looks like I'm getting more of a 53-inch circumference. That's about a difference of 4 inches. And to create symmetry and remove stitches from this in the easiest way, I'd be removing basically 2 cables because I'd be removing one from each underarm. You kind of add on a cable under the arm when you join this all in the round. So if we know that one cable is about 3 inches, to remove 2, that would be about a 6-inch difference, which would then mean that the entire sweater would be about 2 inches smaller in body circumference than I am aiming for. So the real question is, am I more comfortable with it being 4 inches bigger than the other dress, or 2 inches smaller than the other dress, or creating a different look in the design by, say, removing the cable but adding in just a strip of stockinette on the sides, something like that. And for me, I think that the 4-inch difference won't be the end of the world. I will today, put on my other sweater dress. If I look at the sweater dress in the mirror later today and feel like it would look obscene if it was bigger, then I will consider my options for what kind of like arbitrary numbers I can make up to remove that cable that's added under the arms and just add in a couple stockinette stitches or something like that. I'm not opposed to doing that if I feel like it's going to create the best look in the long run. So I'm going to look at this a little bit more critically, but as it is, it seems to me that my sweater is winding up a little bit bigger than my goal. However, from memory, I don't think it's far off from what Magdalena has in the pattern for this size.
What is 135 centimeters in inches?
Okay, so I am right on target for this size that I chose to create. The size down in the pattern,
What is 125 centimeters in inches?
the size down in the pattern does say that it would be about 49 inches, which is the goal sweater. So seems like I did something wrong when I chose the size then. I'm going to mold this one over. Let me know what you guys think. I thought I would also point out, so these cables were looking really funny last week, and I was talking about the fact that there are a lot of stitches being crossed over each other in each of the cables, which is why they were kind of creating these weird little peaks, and it made it look like the cables were wrong or going the wrong way or something. But I was feeling confident that once it was all blocked, they would look right, and they totally do. I think that they look amazing now that they've been blocked in my Wonder Fluff yarn. They're very soft and fuzzy, and this whole thing is super, super lightweight. So things are going well so far. I'm going to have to really think a little bit more critically and take some time to consider all of that information later tonight and decide what I want to do to get the best dress in the end. So I think that's all I have to say for now about the Grayling sweater, other than as of today, it's been on my needles for 60 days. All right, now the final WIP that we'll be talking about today has been on my needles for the least amount of time, and that is my Jose Hood by Nora Knitters. I'm knitting mine out of Cake Wool Company Milk and Cream, so their superwash merino single ply yarn as well as their silk mohair, and they're both in the color Waking Dream. This is a garter stitch hood scarf combo. So much fun, and it's not going to look like anything when I hold it up. There we go. I am so glad that I cast this project on. If you know me at all, you know that I'm really not much of an accessory knitter. In fact, I've knit a relative handful of accessories compared to the sweaters that I have knit in my knitting journey. But this is one that just caught my eye, and I was so happy to use this yarn for something like this. So I'm using a lighter weight yarn than what's called for in the pattern. I believe the pattern calls for an Aran weight yarn, and I'm using a fingering plus mohair, which I think is supposed to get you something like a DK, but I also dropped down my needle size from the recommended 5mm to a 4mm needle. And the only thing that I did to compensate for that shift was that when I did the initial cast on, I added a few stitches to what was stated. I knit a few more rows than what was stated. And then after that whole point, because you do cast on with like the front of the hood and you knit a sort of square with some German short rows worked in there, then you go in and pick up around that square that you've knit and start working down with these increases. And that winds up creating this almost shawl-like shape, that kind of boomerang shawl look, but there's kind of a bucket on the front of it, if that makes any sense. So I will put it on so that you can laugh with me, but it'll help you understand what's going on a little bit better. Excellent. So this is where you cast on, you knit those garter stitches back. You could see here where those seams are, where the direction of the knits stitches change. And once you've completed this section, that's when you pick up and you just start working these increases down. Now I'm pretty close to the end of this whole part of the pattern. So The way that it works then is that it's going to wind up crossing over in the front and then around the back again to the front once more. And then there are these I-cord ties that you add, so you could just tie it off in the front, and it's a little scarf, kind of keeps everything here nice and toasty. And then you obviously have the hood element. And then if you're not interested in wearing the hood while you have this on, you can just kind of drop it down and you still have this really cozy little scarf. The whole front will also be finished with an I-cord edge, which I think will be really nice. And I've just thoroughly enjoyed this pattern. I think it's really smartly written so that you're kind of working in chunks of different increase rates. And so it's a very read the pattern, see what you're about to do, go do it, and don't refer back to the pattern until you finish that section. Then come back to the pattern, check what you're doing, so on and so forth. And the way that I've made this even easier for myself personally is I read in the first section the amount of increases I was supposed to do, and I took that number. I don't remember what it was at all. Let's just say it was 20 increases. I grabbed 20 stitch markers and I put them all onto one stitch marker and left that on my pattern, or I left that on my project somewhere random. As I completed an increase, I went ahead and I marked it. I did that all the way through the end of that section, then read the next section. It's a different increase rate. Now you're also casting on stitches. It's a whole thing to start creating this slope so that it'll kind of keep going around your neck. But at that point, I just adjusted the amount of stitch markers that I had on my project. So let's say it went from 20 increases in the first section to 15 in the next section. I just took 5 stitch markers off of my project, and I made it a point to use a progress keeper to mark the first increase so that I knew that was where the new section started. And then I worked all those 15 increases by just moving the stitch markers from the bottom of the project up as I was from the bottom as I was working up closer and closer to where the needles were. Got to the third section and did the same exact thing. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, where I can tell you that I have worked a good amount of the increase rows that I am instructed to in the pattern. And as it stands, I have 6 increase rows left before I have to refer back to my pattern. And I know that I'm like literally inserting the needle to my sweater to hold it for me. I know that because I still have 6 stitch markers sitting down here marking the increases from the last section, but you can see this whole gap here. This is where I've just been removing them one by one and remarking, and then you see my Black Pearl Magic Progress Keeper right here, and that was the very first increase of the new section in the pattern. If that makes sense, I hope that you'll use that little trick the next time you're doing a project like this, but I've been absolutely in love with this one. I brought it on the train with me this week, and it was the perfect kind of mindless, but still engaging knit. And it's my first garter stitch project. I know everyone talks about the squishiness of the garter stitch, and I am finding this to be so squishy. It's also so rare that I'm working with, superwash and a mohair. So that's what's going on here, and I'm really loving it. I will say that the Cake Wool Company Superwash, I don't know what it is. So that's a single ply yarn. And in the first skein that I worked up, which I quite literally just attached the second skein. So I have already worked through 100 grams of that superwash yarn, still going strong on the mohair. But I think that across that whole skein, there were like 5 different joins in it. I don't know if that was just a fluke. I'll keep an eye out now on the second one, but I was just a little bit surprised by that. I don't typically work with hand-dyed yarns. This one was gifted to me from my friend Shayla. So I'm really excited to be working with it, and I'm really loving the colors and everything, but I just thought I was surprised to have found that in a hand-dyed yarn. Anyway, if you're in the need of a little hood or something like that this season, as of right now, couldn't recommend this enough. I think I need one in a neutral. I think I need to make one for my mom. I think I want to make one for my boyfriend's mom. I think everyone needs one. I think it's really fun, and I'm very much loving the process of making it. So as of today, this one's been on the needles for 9 days, and I'm just absolutely in love with it. I definitely think this will be done by the next time we chat. All that's left to do is finish those 6 increase rows, and then all the I-cord finishing details and all of that. And I will block it when I'm done, just to make sure that all of the yarn blooms and all that. I also have to wash it because it was on the train. So, well, I don't necessarily think you have to block an accessory. I think it's that last little step that just kind of seals the project off. So I'd love to get this done, honestly, by the end of the weekend. I think might be doable, but certainly by the next time we film. So that is the Jose. Did you hear that? Are those bowels? Is it time for a give-a-yay?
It's a holiday give-a-yay!
It's a holiday give-a-yay! I really cracked myself up, but I'm just having so much fun spreading the holiday cheer, and I think it's a good time to let you guys know that we're doing another day of give-a-yays. And I thought for this week's theme, it could be fun if you want to let me know a particular accessory project that you're interested in knitting for yourself, for someone else. Please let me know what that is in the comments. Maybe it is the My Jose Hood. And be sure to comment using hashtag yay, Y-A-Y, and let me know which accessory it is that you're interested in knitting, and something that you would get a bit of a yay out of if you were chosen to win that pattern. Make sure that your comment is there by 12 p.m. Eastern Time on December 20th. That's next Friday. And if you've won, I will be announcing you as a winner in next week's podcast episode. I also think this would just be fun because a lot of us are looking to knit winter accessories this time of year. So I think it'd be really great to see what all everyone else is looking to knit. If you're looking for a little inspiration yourself, please feel free to use the comments as that resource. So thank you so much for participating in our holiday give-a-yay! And let's get back to the video. That is My Jose Hood by Nora Knitters. Been on the needles for 9 days today. All right, let us move right into some acquisitions. I do have a little bit of a plan that I will tell you a bit about after that, but I have 2 different types of acquisitions this week. The first one is yarn. It is the rest of my Knit Picks order that I told you guys about last week. So let us start there. So the yarn that I made this order for was to pick up more of the Knit Picks Bubbly Boucle in the Poppin' Candy color, because I didn't order enough in my first order because I wasn't paying attention. So I will say that, you know, after the whole dye lot discrepancy, I know a lot of people were concerned that I would wind up with the wrong dye lot, but in my second order, I included a note where I put the order number from my first order, and I asked if it was possible to receive the same dye lot. And I don't know if that's why, but I did wind up with the same exact dye lot for the remaining just couple of skeins that I did order. So that's fantastic. It is all from the same dye lot, all of that yarn now. And this is all going to be put towards an Artemisia sweater by Emma Mare. And while we're talking about Emma Mare, that's also the designer whose pattern I ordered the rest of this yarn for. So in order to just meet the free shipping quantity in my order, I decided to purchase yarn to knit my Clematis sweater by Emma Mare, and I went for a fun color for this one. I got the Knit Picks palette in the fingering weight along with their silk mohair aloft. That's the lace weight. The palette is in the colorway Caper. It's a very true, if you've had capers, that's this color. And then the aloft is Mountain Fern Heather. It's definitely a little bit more of a chartreuse undertone. And so it has a little bit more of that yellowy undertone to it. I think together it's going to create for a really fun sweater. I also thought it was kind of funny that my whole thing wound up being like a little Wicked theme. So I'm happy about that too. Now, the other acquisition that I made, this was really fun for me. So, a little bit of a story time. I've always been someone who's very picky about the buttons that I put on my cardigans and things like that. And I just really struggle around me to find anywhere that has a nice button selection that I could choose from. And I kind of joked, like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be so nice if I could just go somewhere where they have walls of buttons and I could just, find all of the different things that I like. So when you see a button in one size and you think, I love that, I just wish it was a little smaller, like they have that as an option. And then I remembered I'm a train ride away from New York City and my sister works there. So I actually asked if she would join me for a day. And we did like a sister day in New York City where we spent the first half of the day going to button shops, my sister's nightmare, but she learned so much and she actually had a really good time. And then the second half of the day, we went and did the touristy things that she doesn't typically get to do when she's going into work. So we went out to lunch, we got some candy, we had cookies, we had a thing called a dirty soda. That was different. We saw the tree. We just had an absolute blast. And I was able to go to some amazing button shops and I was literally in heaven. My sister was so funny because these stores are literally it's like a bookstore, but they're buttons. And instead of books on the shelves, you're looking at boxes that have the buttons that are inside of that box on the inside. I should have taken photos, but we were really just enjoying ourselves so much. And I didn't want to interfere by having my phone out. So I wound up making purchases from 3 different button stores. I went in with a list for my upcoming plans, projects, but then also was kind of open-minded to if I saw buttons that I really loved, I was allowed to get those and just knew that this was an opportunity for me to pick up some really special buttons and at really great prices. So something that I thought was kind of funny is that the antler buttons that I have used in the past, my $40 buttons, those buttons were each $10 at a local yarn store. And I found those same exact buttons in the city for $4 a button. And I just was like, what the heck? So I'm just going to rattle off the different shops that I purchased from, and I will include, or I will have already included, a photo or something of all of the buttons that I got kind of laid out because I did get quite the supply of them. But it just was a really fun day. It was the perfect thing to go do in the city if you have access to New York City, or maybe a city near you has stuff like this, where you literally have these stores dedicated to notions and things of the like. It was the perfect thing to go do because they're not so expensive. They're also small, so they're easy to carry around all day. I just had a backpack full of buttons by the end of the day, but it just was so much fun. There's so much choice. There's so many interesting things at these stores that you never get to see elsewhere. And even my sister, who is not a crafty person at all, I was like, this must be your nightmare. And she wound up saying like, no, it was actually really cool. It was fun to see all of the different things that go into making garments for yourself. And she's like, I have a whole new world of just, I had no idea that all of this went into making a garment. And she had fun helping choose the buttons. She got to see, like she said, oh, it's cool to see you in your element, because I was having a blast. Like, I can't wait to do this again. It was genuinely just the best day. And yeah, I took the train in, so I was able to knit on the train. And it just was a great day. We had great food. It was a great time. So the 3 button shops that I wound up purchasing from were C&C Button Incorporated, Pacific Trimming Enterprise Incorporated. I will say that was probably my favorite place. There they had kind of like jewelry islands full of buttons, and you literally took a tray and just kind of walked around to each one and picked up the the buttons that you wanted and put them in your tray and then brought them to the like button evaluator who then told you how much you were paying. The prices were also on each of the little containers, which was just so nice because even here you don't really find that a lot. And then the final one that we went to was M&J Trim, but they were going out of business. So that was kind of sad because they had a lot of choice and a lot of selection. The good news was that meant everything was 30% off. So that was where a lot of my kind of one-off buttons came from. And I also picked up there a couple of these little bulk bags of buttons. They had these for $5, and I have quite literally purchased, I got some shell buttons and then some metal brass buttons. And I just know that these are two of my favorite looks that I'm going for with a button. And I have literally purchased this size shell button locally before at $5 per button. So when I saw that they had this bag for $5 on its own, I thought these would be good to choose for just some bulk, good to have in the button stash. And that just reminds me, if you have a way that you like to organize your buttons, please let me know, because now I do have a good lineup for upcoming projects. And I'm just nervous that they're all going to be in these little baggies and I'm never going to know what I actually have. So I'm thinking a sort of like tackle box setup would be the best. But let me know if you have a way that you like to store your own buttons so that I could adopt that idea from you. So yeah, those were the acquisitions. Lots of really fun stuff. And then the only other thing, which actually it's kind of a departure from those acquisitions, is in the way of news or plans. If you haven't seen it already, I did post my winter knitting plans video, which most of those buttons that I got are supporting those things. The clematis sweater is a pattern that I discussed in my winter knitting plans, and I just didn't have the yarn for it yet. So if you haven't seen that yet and you're interested in checking out my winter knitting plans, then I do recommend you go check that out. And another thing that I talk about in those plans is the next cast on that I'm planning, which is the Granada sweater by Claudia Quintanilla. It's in her book, Memory Lane. Now, the yarn for this sweater, as well as this book, were both gifted to me very generously by Claudia and her team at Unit Toronto. And I've just been sitting on this waiting to have a second to get it started, but I'm really excited to do that now. So just last night, I went ahead and did my gauge swatch. It's since been blocked. This is the Ito yarn. It is their silk held with their mohair. And oh my gosh, okay, let me put this down for a second. This fabric is like the lightest, fluffiest, most delightful thing ever. But basically, I'm hoping that this can act as my mindless knit as I move into a couple more mindful knits and keep going with the grayling and all of that. So I wanted to make sure I kind of got this started and could get it to in the round knitting as soon as possible. But in order to knit up my swatch, I dug out the book just to see what the needle size was and, what the gauge was recommended. And so it was really my first time actually sitting down working from the book. And it just reminded me how lovely the things in here are. And this really would be such a beautiful gift. If you know a knitter or if you're looking to gift for yourself for Christmas, there's a really fun mix of, I think that the color work patterns in this book are probably the showstoppers of it all, but there's also just some really special pieces. And I think all of these designs are just so different from each other. It would be a really nice book to have, but I also acknowledge the fact that this pattern currently only lives within this book. So I'm definitely very grateful to Claudia and her team for gifting these things, and I'm excited to work from them at all. And I just wanted to make sure that I threw that out there, because if you're looking for a gift for a knitter, this is really a beautiful book to pull from. There's a lot of inspiration in there. So really excited about these plans, really excited about my new yarn and my buttons and my new sweater. It's a good day over here for me. So I think that is everything. I'm feeling anxious about the Grayling sweater, and I definitely need to go run some numbers with all of that and just make sure that we're on track. But it's definitely something that we're still close enough to where those sleeves where we joined in the round that I would rather address any issues now than have it be down to my knees and realize I made it too big. that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, I would very much appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, you're going to be notified anytime I post a video, just like that winter knitting plans video that went up this week. However, you can always count on there being a Saturday morning podcast at 9:30 a.m. Eastern time. And with all of that being said, a big ol' thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. All right, you guys, bye.